Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Excuse the state of me and also my voice. I am on my deathbed with a cold. But it's been so long since I've made a YouTube video and I feel like it's time to try and get back into it and try and actually make some more content. I feel like recently I've been really umming and ahhing about what kind of content I want to be uploading to YouTube. Obviously the main kind of niche, I guess, that my channel really went by was tattoos and piercings when I was younger. That's the reason that I have the following I have today. That's the reason that my channel kind of became more successful. But obviously I'm no longer a 14-year-old tattooing herself, and there's only so many piercings you can do before you run out of space. But now as a 20-year-old woman, might need a different focus. That's what I've come to realise. And something that I feel would be maybe quite a nice thing to focus on, or a good thing to focus on, is maybe some more health related content, because if anyone's new here, I am chronically ill. I have been for 4 years now. And if there is one thing I've found through my health journey, is that I have felt very, very alone and very isolated at times within my journey. Because it's not, you know, your average human experience. It's not something that everyone can relate to. It's not something that everyone can understand. But one thing I have found, and that has been a consistent comfort throughout this period for me, was social media and the people online, the communities online that are living a similar experience to me and share their experiences. And so I'm gonna trial making some health content here and there, you know, again, not gonna be like the sole purpose of my channel, but it's definitely something I want to focus on more and just see what the response is like, see if it's something that other people would also enjoy, if it gets out there to the right people, if people would like to see more content like that from me. And there's a lot to document, let's be real. Like, people who are chronically ill go through a lot in their day-to-day lives, lots of hospital appointments, lots of different medical tests, all sorts of things that someone who isn't chronically ill might not even recognise or realise or understand that much. So I thought, what better place to start in terms of that content than a bit of a my health journey so far video, kind of talking about how my health issues developed, what my journey has been like, the different diagnoses I've received since my first symptoms to now, different tests I've done, you know, just kind of go over my general health journey so far. I'd also like to disclaim, my health is still under investigation. I've not received probably every diagnosis I should. Specifically, I've been being investigated for POTS for the last 2 years and I'm still not under a firm diagnosis. It's very, very, very highly likely that it is POTS. On a lot of my medical letters it's stated as POTS, and I'm under a POTS specialist. So, like, one of the top POTS specialists in the UK. Therefore, I feel confident that I will receive a POTS diagnosis, and I feel confident to talk about my health in terms of POTS, suspected POTS. This is not just coming from like a self-diagnosis point of view, it's more coming from genuine appointments and conversations I've had with professionals. So, let's talk a little bit about my backstory. I have not been ill my whole life, or at least I've not been aware of being unwell my whole life. Through my childhood, I was seemingly very healthy. Minus kind of anxiety and things like that through my childhood, I came across as very physically healthy. I did not have an easy childhood, that's for sure. I went through a lot of different traumas from a very young age, which developed in lots of mental health conditions, and the reason that I feel that it's relevant to mention that is because some of the diagnoses I've received / conditions I'm suspected to have actually link quite closely to trauma, emotional trauma. In 2021, I was age 16. One day I woke up and I felt really, really dizzy out of absolutely nowhere. Never experienced this before. That was my first symptom or my first sign that something was wrong. Now, obviously, you know, for any average person, if you woke up one day and just felt a bit dizzy, you'd think, oh, maybe I'm ill, maybe I've got the flu or something, you know, which is what I initially thought. I thought, maybe I'm just, you know, a little bit unwell, maybe I've caught something, some virus or something that's made me feel a little bit dizzy. That dizziness became so severe so quickly that I could not even stand in the shower. Now, I was someone who had always been able to be on my feet, stand in the shower, whatever. Suddenly I couldn't do that. I felt too unwell, I felt too dizzy. My vision was kind of blacking out when I was standing up. Came on very, very suddenly. And so, as probably most people would, I ignored it for a couple of weeks. I thought it would probably go away. So after a couple of weeks, I thought, okay, this is a little bit scary now. Maybe I should speak to someone about it. So I believe I called 111 to discuss it with them. Went through my symptoms. I can't remember if any other symptoms had arisen at this point, like severely. Speak to 111, they say, go get checked out, go to A&E. That's what I did. I'm still, you know, able to be on my feet at this point. Like, I could walk from, like, say, the car to the hospital. I could walk from the waiting room to the, you know, the treatment room, whatever. Like, I was dizzy, but I was capable of still kind of living quite normally. I left being told that it was basically chronic dizziness coming on from my anxiety. They did an ECG on me. They noticed I had heart palpitations on my ECG. my heart rate was very high, and they looked at my records and they saw anxiety and they put 2 and 2 together and said, yep, it's anxiety that you have. And I was put onto a medication that I'm still on to this day, which is called prochlorperazine, which is an anti-dizziness, anti-nausea, anti-psychotic, anti-anxiety, million things in one pill. I have found that it's only helped with my nausea down the line. It didn't take the dizziness away. Went about my life thinking, you know, it's just anxiety. My anxiety is making me unwell. It's making me feel dizzy. Not unheard of. That's fine. So then fast forward on to like a couple of years later. So 2022 was okay. I was managing. I was still under the impression it was anxiety. It didn't improve. It didn't worsen. I was kind of just in a similar state, really. Now, get to 2023. I had a lot of life-changing stuff happen in 2023. I moved out for the first time. I moved 100 miles away from my hometown, moved into a not very good situation, to put it lightly, something that would make your nervous system very dysregulated. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, POTS specifically is an autonomic nervous system disorder. So 2023, I move out, I start living with my at the time partner. Things are not in the best way. My nervous system is getting more and more and more dysregulated. Fast forward to maybe like 3-4 months into living there, I start becoming more unwell. My dizziness is getting worse. I am struggling to even go into a food shop. Could not do that anymore. I would walk to the shop, halfway on the walk, I would start getting dizzy. Or I would make it to the shop, start food shopping, have to go outside, go sit on the floor because I felt like I was going to pass out. And eventually this reached the point that I just couldn't do it anymore. I was just bedbound pretty much. So yeah, I started staying in bed a lot more, I started sleeping a lot more, I started avoiding going out a lot more because I was scared about flaring up, I was scared about getting dizzy, I was scared about passing out, not that it had ever happened, but I was scared that I may end up blacking out somewhere in the middle of the street. I just didn't want to do anything. Funnily enough, first moment that I thought I might have POTS, I was scrolling through TikTok while not feeling well, while in bed, stumbled across this video of someone talking about anxiety dizziness, and then I went to the comment section and the top comment was, "This sounds more like POTS, look into POTS." And so I googled what POTS was, obviously out of interest because I had been told I had anxiety dizziness, and suddenly everything made sense. Every single symptom that it listed, I was like, holy shit, this is literally describing my life. Next day, I call my GP, I'm like, hey, look, I have had this dizziness for like 2 years now. It seems to be worsening quite drastically. I'm really, really struggling to get out of the house. I'm really struggling to have a normal sense of life. Also, something to note was at this point in my life, my anxiety was actually much better than it had been when I'd initially had the symptoms come on. My anxiety hadn't worsened, but yet my symptoms had. So I speak to my GP and I say, hey, look, I've been looking into, my symptoms. I've seen this thing called POTS. I would love to be investigated for it. I would love for just someone to kind of see if I meet the criteria because it feels a lot more fitting. Little did I know, that was not going to be a quick process. We are now in 2025. I'm still under investigations, but I have got a lot closer in the last year, so, it's okay. So my doctor goes through a list of symptoms, she starts sussing it out. She agrees that actually, yeah, okay, this sounds like it could be POTS, let's refer you to a cardiologist. Oh, another point to add as well was actually before I thought it was POTS and before I had that realisation that I thought it might be more of like a cardio problem. When I actually spoke to my doctor and said, look, my dizziness is getting worse, I'd called her before this, maybe a couple of months before this, and said, look, it feels like it's worsening. I actually got invited into the doctor's office to check my ears because they thought it might have been something to do with like my ears causing vertigo or like something being off balance. They couldn't find any problems. Surprise, surprise, was not linked to my ears. So anyway, at this point, I get referred to a cardiologist, which is like first step in the direction of, okay, maybe this is not just an anxiety in my head thing. By the end of that year, I had rented my first wheelchair from the British Red Cross. I had had a conversation with my doctor at this point, face to face. I'm at the point where I cannot have a normal quality of life anymore. I'm not able to go out of the house really at all. I'm so symptomatic, I'm not managing, this is getting like severely worse, and I feel like I might benefit from having a wheelchair or some sort of aid to help me get through the day, and also to give me that freedom back that even if I'm not feeling well or I'm not feeling stable in my own body, that I can still go out and have some sort of quality of life. And she agreed with me, and so I was then prescribed a NHS wheelchair to have as my own. However, as most things on the NHS are, was not quick. I had to wait a fair few months before I got my NHS wheelchair, and in the meantime I was not functional enough to continue my day-to-day life as I wanted to. So that is when I then hired a British Red Cross wheelchair, which I just hired on a few month basis, I think. And that made me a lot more able to manage things, a lot more able to get out and actually have some level of quality of life. Around this same time, maybe the end of that year, I had started experiencing pain in my hip, quite severe pain, which came from an issue that also I noticed, at least when I was around age 16. I don't know if it was going on before that, honestly, my memory is blurred in terms of it. But around 16, I noticed I had an issue with my hip. My hip kept dislocating, or what they actually call it is like a subluxation, which means it's not fully going out of place, but it's kind of popping in and out of the socket, and it pops itself back in. You don't have to like go get it put back in. That had been going on for a while at this point, like at least 2 or 3 years. I'd had it checked previously. My doctor had had a look at it back when I was around 16. I went and got it checked and just said, you know, my hip seems to be popping in and out of place. It's not causing me any pain, but something's clearly not right. And she looked over it, and her exact words were, if this does not get fixed within the next couple of years, you are going to need a hip replacement in your 20s. Like, it was a severe problem. I got sent for an x-ray. This is again back when I was 16. The x-ray looked completely normal. That was the end of it. Didn't get a referral anywhere. Nothing else came of it. But when it started causing me pain, I thought, okay, this is clearly an issue. It's still ringing in my head that my doctor said, you know, this will lead to a hip replacement if it doesn't get resolved. It wasn't getting resolved. And so at this point, I was referred to an orthopaedic doctor. Around the same time as well, one of my family members, distant family members, caught drift of what was going on with my health. I think I'd probably shared something on Facebook or whatever. She got in touch with me, hadn't spoke to her in a long time, to let me know that she had diagnosed POTS, as well as Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome I'd never heard of. I looked into it. I thought, this also kind of makes sense, potentially with my problem with my hip, because it was talking about hypermobility and stuff. So then began the investigations for potential Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Suddenly there was all of these different things, and this is something that I've seen a lot of people speak about, is you develop one chronic illness or you have one issue pop up, and then suddenly all of these other things go hand in hand with it. And actually you realise it might not just be one condition, you might be having a bit of a cocktail of problems going on. So around, I think, January of 2024, I went to go see an orthopaedic doctor finally. He checked over my hip and he literally said, this is the worst thing I've seen in 10 years of being an orthopaedic doctor. I will say that appointment was actually quite frustrating, but that's a story for another day. But he said there and then that it was a hypermobility issue. That was the problem with my hip, was that it was hypermobile, way too hypermobile, that was what was causing it to pop out of place. I asked him directly if he thought that it could have been hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and he said there's no point in getting diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos because there is no cure. So basically this doctor straight up told me, don't worry about it, if it is Ehlers-Danlos, doesn't matter because can't do anything for it anyway, so just take the hypermobility diagnosis and leave it at that. I was not prepared to do that because I'd already had a conversation with my doctor about potential Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and she had directly told me that if I was to have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, my whole system needed to be treated differently, basically. I'd been having gut issues at this point around, again, beginning of 2024. I'd started experiencing extreme nausea in the morning, so I was waking up feeling really, really sick. I've been diagnosed with IBS since a very young age. I've always had problems with my bowel movements, pain, you know, nausea, all of this stuff. This was all happening around the same time, and she said, if you have got Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, your system needs to be treated differently and people need to be aware of it. So actually, it's very important to get that diagnosed if that is what is going on. So after my orthopaedic appointment, I spoke to my GP again and I said, look, this is what he said. He said it's not important enough to get a diagnosis on. Do you agree? If you don't, is there any chance you could refer me to someone who could look into it? She agreed that it needed to be looked into, and so she referred me to a rheumatologist. That referral got rejected. She then referred me to another rheumatologist who also rejected the referral. The second one who rejected it actually said to my GP directly, look, here's the Baton scale, which is basically how they diagnose hypermobile EDS. They sent my GP the Baton scale test to print out and do herself in the GP office, basically, which thankfully my previous GP was absolutely amazing and she was willing to do that. However, obviously she was not specialist enough to give me a firm diagnosis. All she could do was just assess whether she thought that it might be fitting. And so I went in, I think around March last year, she did this Baton scale test on me and she said, well, you certainly look like you tick all the boxes to me. Now around this time, so around like March last year, I'd officially reached the point that I was basically incapable of leaving the house without my wheelchair. I could no longer even do a short journey without my wheelchair. And that is unfortunately still where I'm at today. Every time that I leave the house, especially if, you know, it's a day out or there's a lot of walking involved, or, you know, every time that I go and do a food shop, every single time that I've done a food shop in the last year and a bit, I would say, I've had to be in a wheelchair. That is still unfortunately the reality, even today. So in May last year, 2024, I finally had my first face-to-face appointment with a cardiologist. He assessed my situation. He said, yep, it seems like there's a very, very high chance that this is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS. And so at that point, he referred me to a London specialist who is literally a specialist in POTS, a cardiologist, but focuses on POTS. So I was referred up to him, as well as sent for some different tests with my cardiologist who is local. He put me on another medication called Ivermectin, which again, I'm still on to this day. I have found it useful in some ways. It's actually a heart failure medication, but what was explained to me in that appointment, that first face-to-face, is that because POTS is a syndrome rather than like a disease, there is no specific medication for it. There's no specific cure. I already knew from my own research at this point that POTS is unfortunately incurable, and so if that's what it was, there wasn't any way of getting out of it. It was a chronic illness. I was going to have it for the rest of my life, which has been really hard to process because I am 20 years old. You know, I'm someone who used to have pretty much my full mobility, and now I am actually in a wheelchair most of the time, which is something I never expected to be my life. I certainly don't feel shame anymore about using a wheelchair, despite the fact, you know, you get funny looks and stuff and people assume because you're young that you're fit and healthy. There's no shame in it. That's something I've realised. So anyway, I was put on this medication, Ivermectin, which is a heart failure medication, but it specifically lowers your heart rate or lowers the jumps between your heart rate. So for me, it has lowered my general heart rate, like my resting heart rate is lower than it used to be. Even if my heart rate goes up, it generally, most of the time, doesn't go as high as it used to. But the jumps, unfortunately, are still just as bad, so I still feel very symptomatic. So where in the past, you know, it might have been that my resting heart rate was 90, I stood up, it went to 120. It's more now, my resting heart rate is 70. When I stand, it might go up to 100. It's more like a lower end of the spectrum, but the jump is the same. But I have found that it's been useful for heart palpitations. I feel them a lot less frequently when I'm on my medication, when I have taken it. They also finally diagnosed that I also have arrhythmia, so my heart rate, my heart beats are irregular, if that makes sense as well. I then started getting sent for many different tests. So I had a 24-hour Holter ECG fitted to me, which is when you have like a ECG, you know, like the little stickers that go on your chest. It's attached to a little machine. You press a button every time that you feel symptomatic and they can just see what's physically going on with your heart at the time. So I had one of those. I then had a 3-day ECG, so I had one on for 3 days. That was for my London specialist. That was around, I think, August last year. I had a 24-hour urine sample, which is when you just have to pee into a bottle for 24 hours every time you need to go so that they can see how dehydrated you are. That's to check like your sodium levels and stuff. Everything kind of sped up quite a lot around this time. You know, I was having lots of different tests. I had an echocardiogram, which is like an ultrasound on your heart. I was referred for a tilt table test, but unfortunately did not manage to go to that. I did not feel well enough, and I've heard so many horror stories that it's really, really, really put me off of having one. I know the day will probably come where I have to, but at the time I was really, really in the pits with my health, and I spoke to my cardiologist and he agreed that I was not well enough to take the test at the time, considering a tilt table test is literally designed to make you symptomatic. So yeah, I had a lot of back and forth appointments to the local cardiologist, also many, many, many trips to London to go and have tests done for my hot specialist. I also had a stress test at some point. Oh my god, that's one I nearly forgot. Stress test, I lasted about 20 seconds, just for the record. I lasted about 20 seconds. For anyone who doesn't know what a stress test is, it's when they put you on a treadmill and make you basically pace on a treadmill and see what your heart does and how it reacts to exercise and stuff. Did not go well for me at all, let me tell you that. So yeah, it's been kind of ongoing tests over the last few months. Moving on to more recent times, so in the last kind of 2-3 months, I finally got referred to rheumatology and actually got accepted. I contacted my GP because now I've moved areas, so I'm technically in like a different county now. I contacted my GP and I said, look, can you try and refer me to rheumatology again? It's always been rejected, but I really, really want to get this assessment for Ehlers-Danlos loss. And so they referred me and it finally got accepted. So I went and had a face-to-face rheumatology appointment about a month ago now, maybe less than. And turns out I do not have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. They assessed me for it and I actually scored 5 on the Baton score rather than whatever it is that you need for EDS, I don't know what it is. I scored 5, which is too low for hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos loss. However, it did give me the diagnosis of HSD, hypermobility spectrum disorder. And as much as I'm pretty sure your hips aren't something that's checked on the Baton score, on the Baton scale, he did check my hips and he was like, holy shit, your hips are insanely hypermobile. And I also, that day from the rheumatologist, also got a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, a firm diagnosis, which is something I actually hadn't suspected to be diagnosed with, as much as I do experience widespread pain and everything. For anyone who doesn't know what fibromyalgia is, it is a chronic pain and chronic fatigue condition. Chronic fatigue, certainly know I had that. That was no surprise to me. It does not matter how much I sleep, I do not feel rested. I do not feel like I've slept. I feel constantly in this fog of exhaustion. Brain fog is another symptom. I experience brain fog a lot, lack of concentration, and widespread pain, as it is a chronic pain condition. So basically there's like pressure points that they check, or at least in my appointment they did. Every single place that he pressed on my body, it was uncomfortable, it was sore. And I have bursts of actual pain as well, with like my hip, my legs, my shoulders, my back, like coat hanger pain, things like that. I have at least like one burst of pain a day in at least one part of my body. Plus IBS also goes hand in hand with fibromyalgia. I received a fibromyalgia diagnosis, which is now a firm diagnosis that I have. Another thing as well that had also been going on kind of on and off over the last couple of years was at some point in 2023, I had this really, really sudden pain in my ovary. And it was absolutely excruciating, to the point I rang 111. They immediately sent 2 ambulances to me because they thought that my appendix had burst. That's how severe the pain was. Turns out it was an ovarian cyst. I ended up having to go for an ultrasound on it, and basically I had this reoccurring ovarian cyst that came back and then burst 2 or 3 times, and it was that bursting that caused the pain. I had that happen a few times. And then last year, I just randomly missed my period for 3 months, which was really fucking weird. Still to this day, don't know why that was. I had so many different checks at the time, and it was nothing that was visibly obvious. Then eventually just came back. And then after it came back, I started finding that my periods were severely more painful than usual. And I do find that I still get pain in my ovaries and stuff. So that was also something that recently got investigated, and I've now been referred to gynae because they're suspecting I could have maybe PCOS or endometriosis, or my suspicion is that it could also be maybe linked to the fibromyalgia, now that I know I have that, because it can cause more painful periods and stuff. So that's something that I don't really have a lot to say about because it's still in such an investigation area. I honestly could not tell you what it is. And really the most recent bit of news, which was actually like a really shocking part of my journey so far, and I really didn't expect, was I went for an MRI on my chest, a cardiac MRI, because my POT specialist wanted to check that I had enough blood flowing to my heart. Turns out there is not enough blood flowing to my heart, so I received my results back. I think it was about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. They also diagnosed that I have pectus, which is something I did not know I had. I've had it my whole life, obviously, it's something you're born with. And somehow they'd never actually picked it up, they'd never noticed it. Like, the amount of exams I've had on my chest, you would have thought someone would notice, because it's visible from the outside. Like, you can see the indent in my chest. For anyone who doesn't know what pectus is, it's a chest deformity, so it basically means your chest either grows like outwards or inwards. For me, it's inwards. I have like a 3 centimeter indent in my chest where my bones and my cartilage are like grown in. And from the MRI, they found that I had pectus, as well as the fact that my heart has now been displaced to the left because of the pectus. And because my heart's been displaced, I think it's all linked. There's now not enough blood flow to my heart, so from both sides of my heart, it's not getting quite enough in. And I've got like reduced volumes on both sides. I honestly can't talk too much about that yet. I was absolutely terrified when I got the results. It made me really upset. I was really confused, especially because I received my results via an email. So I was like, what the fuck? I don't know what to do with any of this. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to speak to anyone directly about the results. So I haven't been able to kind of get any real reassurance on it. Certainly, a lack of blood flow to your heart is not a light-hearted problem, but as much as it's very scary, until I've spoken to my actual specialist about it, I don't know what the next steps are. I don't know whether it will be surgery on my chest to correct it. Sometimes you can get a bar put in your chest because of pectus. Don't know if I'll need that. Medication for the lack of blood flow. I don't know what's going to come of that. But that's really been the most recent bit of health news, and that's been a really surprising one because I didn't expect for them to find anything on the MRI. But yeah, really, that is kind of my health journey so far, I guess. That's where I'm at now. Still under a London specialist, so finally got a face-to-face with him next month. Still under my local cardiologist. Finally referred to gynae. Under rheumatology for my fibro and hip issue. They're looking at sending me either to a pain clinic or something. And also, I've got to have another MRI on my hip. MRIs are so terrifying. Why does no one talk about that? They're so scary. That was my first one, my cardiac one. Now I've got to have another one already. Just recovered from the last one, but they wanted to MRI my hip to check what the damage is there and if I need a hip replacement or something at 20 years old. I don't know. I've summarised, I think, everything, honestly. It's probably all over the place, this video. I'm probably going to hate editing this. But I just thought I would do like a general summary of kind of my health issues up to this point. It's been very overwhelming, it's been a lot going on, and it's been very difficult to deal with considering, as I said before, this hasn't been my whole life. I'm not used to these procedures, I'm not used to these symptoms. But if you did enjoy this video, please let me know. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. Fitting, right as I'm ending the video, my doctor's called me. But yeah, I think that summarises everything, and I definitely would like to make some more content surrounding these topics because I think they need to be spoken about more, and the world is still very clueless to a lot of chronically ill people and what we go through, so let me know what you would like to see. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye!